Every commercial drone flight begins with the same sequence. You check LAANC for airspace authorizations, scan the NOTAM portals, and verify the physical boundaries of controlled airspace. The entire system relies on a single premise. If the airspace map is clear, your flight is legally protected. As of January 2026, that premise is dead. A completely clear pre-flight map no longer guarantees legal compliance. There is now an invisible restriction layered over the entire country. It has no map coordinates, and it can engulf a compliant aircraft mid-flight without any warning. Getting caught inside this zone triggers an automatic violation of national defense airspace. This brings immediate and severe legal penalties. The traditional pre-flight checklist and the static graphic maps we've relied on for years are now obsolete for commercial operations in urban environments. The root cause of this entire disruption is a single regulatory order, NOTAM FDC 64375, issued on January 16, 2026. This is a nationwide flight restriction. It covers all 50 states and remains in effect continuously for nearly 2 years. Traditional temporary flight restrictions are anchored to specific places, like stadiums or wildfire zones. This restriction has zero geographic boundaries. Instead of being tied to a location, it is tied to federal personnel and vehicles. The restricted airspace physically moves with them down the street. This rule applies universally. It restricts recreational flyers, standard Part 107 operators, and commercial pilots holding advanced airspace waivers. You can clear your airspace meticulously before launch, but the restricted airspace can literally drive into your operational area after you take off. To understand the scale of this hazard, look at the precise wording of the NOTAM.
It mandates separation of 3,000 feet laterally and 1,000 feet above the mobile asset. Horizontally, that creates a 3,000-foot standoff distance, projecting outward in all directions from the center of the vehicle. In practical terms, a single government SUV generates a mobile no-fly zone covering roughly 1.3 square miles of surface area. Vertically, that footprint extends upward, creating a solid cylinder of restricted airspace with a 1,000-foot ceiling. Standard commercial operations are capped at 400 feet above ground level. A compliant drone operating at its maximum legal altitude will be completely swallowed by this cylinder as it passes by. This restriction is generated by the physical presence of assets from the Departments of Defense, Energy, Justice, and Homeland Security. The text explicitly covers all vessels and ground vehicle convoys, making maritime operations over coastal cities just as restricted as inland highways. When these vehicles travel in a convoy, their individual 1.3 square mile zones overlap and drag behind one another, compounding the total restricted area. A single convoy passing through a metropolitan area effectively shuts down millions of cubic feet of airspace in real time, with no advanced warning system available to track it. Identifying these assets in the field is a massive compliance failure point. Agencies under the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security rely heavily on operational secrecy. They do not publish their travel routes in advance. Field agents, particularly those working for Customs and Border Protection and ICE, frequently operate out of standard, unmarked rental vehicles. These agents routinely swap license plates. For a drone operator looking down from 200 feet, visually identifying a federal asset is functionally impossible. Even heavily marked Federal Protective Service vehicles offer no public telemetry or transponder data that drone pilots can plug into their flight software. If you are inspecting a high-rise facade in a downtown corridor, you have no way of knowing if a DHS vehicle is parked in an adjacent parking garage or driving within a half-mile radius. Commercial operators are legally required to maintain strict physical separation from a hazard that the government intentionally keeps hidden. The FAA classifies this mobile bubble as national defense airspace. From a legal perspective, entering this zone carries the exact same weight as flying a drone directly over the Pentagon or a nuclear power plant. This classification meets its enforcement mechanism in Compliance and Enforcement Bulletin No. 2026-1. This bulletin officially ends the FAA's previous compliance philosophy, which relied on education and warnings for first-time airspace errors. It establishes a strict liability standard. Any violation, even if entirely accidental and harmless, bypasses local administrative review and goes directly to the chief counsel for legal action. The financial stakes are ruinous. Enforcement penalties under this directive can reach up to $75,000 per incident. Beyond fines, Violating this mobile restriction places your Part 107 commercial certificate at immediate risk of suspension or total revocation. For dual-rated operators holding manned commercial pilot licenses, the bulletin explicitly targets all airman certificates held by the violator. Accidental proximity to a single, unmarked government SUV can now instantly and permanently end an entire aviation career. Civil liberties groups and press organizations are currently fighting this restriction in federal court. Their central argument is that creating an unmappable zone around government agents effectively criminalizes the First Amendment right to document law enforcement in public spaces. But a constitutional challenge does not function as operational guidance in the field. Until a federal judge officially issues an injunction against it, NOTAM FDC 64375 is active, fully enforceable law. A commercial mapping or infrastructure operator cannot rely on a First Amendment defense if they accidentally trigger a proximity violation during a routine job. Enterprise programs and solo operators must completely revise how they assess risk in urban environments. The first line of defense is hyperdocumentation of your pre-flight intent. Because you cannot prove a federal vehicle wasn't in your flight path, you must build an airtight paper trail. Log your NOTAM checks, save your airspace screenshots, and document every step you took to avoid a hazard before launch. The second protocol is conservative urban separation. Treat courthouses, federal agency buildings, and heavy law enforcement corridors as inherently high-risk zones, regardless of what your LAANC authorization says. Build deliberate lateral offsets into your flight plans and rely on high-power camera zoom to capture data, rather than flying in close physical proximity. The final protocol is enterprise-level review for beyond visual line-of-sight operations. Part 108 rules and specific BVLOS waivers do not grant blanket immunity to fly through national defense airspace. Program managers running extended corridors over urban traffic must explicitly address these mobile TFR encounters in their internal safety cases. Airspace management has moved from static geography to dynamic enforcement. Failing to account for mobile assets means risking the full weight of legal action under the new enforcement bulletin.